funeral practices, not only have they changed in recent years, they vary from location to location. When you go to pastor a church in a certain area, one of the best things you can do is get lunch with a local funeral director and just sort of ask him how it works there. For instance, in Knoxville, Tennessee, they have funerals at night and then come back and bury the body the next day. Now, I like that, but I don't know any other places that do it. But in Knoxville, Tennessee, that's the way they do it. Frankfort is even a little bit different the way they do funeral practices than Lexington was. Louisville's still different. I mean, every place sort of gets their feel. And if you can sort of get a feel for the way funerals take place, it'll help you not feel out of place when you have your first one. So typically, families now do visitation on the night before the funeral, where people come and agree with them. Guys, I will tell you, if there's a way you can keep families from having a long line of people just standing around waiting to see the body and shake their hand, do it. I'll tell you what we recently did at Buck Run with Doug Sanderson's funeral, as a matter of fact. So instead of having the viewing at the funeral home, did it at the church. Our church has a lot more room. The family left the body in state in the sanctuary. They stayed out in our lobby. Now, our lobby's bigger than this room. And they stood out in the lobby greeting people and talking to people. And if people wanted to view the body, they could go in and see it. Typically what people have done is the family will stand by the body, and you have this long line. And if you have a lot of friends, the line can be 2-3 hours long, and it's just hard on everybody. This way, the family dispersed around the lobby, and people could talk to some of them, all of them, take time, but there was no line. You could go in and see the body if you wanted. There were a few family members that stayed in there. His brother did, but his children, his wife stayed out in the lobby. And the funeral director told me, he said, "This is the best I've ever seen it done." He said, this really needs to be the new model. So I'm pushing for that. It's just hard on people, especially like an older person who loses a spouse. They stand there for 3-4 hours greeting people. You need to have a stool for them to sit. Just sort of think what you as the pastor can do to help in that. The other thing that I do is I try and talk to them. Now, there are people that have plenty of money and they've got an insurance policy, and I don't intervene or interfere with them. But sometimes when I suspect that this widow is going to be left without much, I sort of give her permission to not spend a lot on the funeral. I sort of coach her that way. I have gone to the funeral home with the family before. Most funeral directors are good and reputable, and they don't try and sell people more than they can afford. A few try and guilt people in. You want your dad to have the nicest, don't you? That's bad business. But if you as the pastor go with them, if you suspect that might happen, it's a good thing for you or somebody to be with them, because you can drop $20,000 on a funeral just like that. I mean, somebody gets a nice, solid cherry casket, and you get, the family, the hearse and the family limo and all that. It adds up quickly, and for what? So I try and sometimes give people permission. The other thing, like in Kentucky, you have to buy a vault for the grave. And they really upsell those vaults. Now, the reality is, ultimately, that vault's going to give way to something. And does it matter if that vault's going to last 200 years and go through a nuclear war? I think that's the biggest waste of money. I tell them, buy the cheapest vault that you can. By law, you have to put a vault in that grave, in Kentucky anyway. I tell them, buy the cheapest vault you can buy. Don't spend a lot of money on a vault. They tell you, now this one is waterproof and all that. Hey, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be? It just won't matter. Uh, just tell them to buy a cheap vault. And again, some people don't need my advice at all. They've either got plenty of money, or they're smart and savvy about financial things, or they're already a tightwad. But I can sort of sense when people don't have much, and they need to protect what they have, and I just sort of give them permission. Now, can I make a suggestion? Don't spend too much on this funeral. This is not a sign of your love for your husband. He would want you to have your needs taken care of. I assure you of that. And I'll just say things like that to them. And if I need to, I've gone to the funeral home with some of them, and give them permission to do that. So the visitation, usually the night before. Now in Kentucky, you're seeing some people do visitation just right before the funeral. So if they have a 1 o'clock funeral, they'll start visitation 10 or even 11 o'clock. And the family will stand there, and people can come, drop in, and see them and leave, stay for the funeral if they want. They have visitation, the funeral, all in one event. When you preach the funeral, here's the basic layout of a funeral, all right? And you always have to work with the funeral director at the service, depending on whether the family is going to have singers or songs played, and depending on whether or not there's more than one minister. So here's the basic flow of the service. Think of it like this. You need to begin with scripture and prayer. You don't really say anything. You just read some appropriate scripture, John 14 or something like that, let not your heart be troubled, or 23rd Psalm. So you read scripture, about 5 minutes, probably 2 to 3 minutes worth, and pray. Then you have the obituary. Say your personal remarks. So those personal remarks would include like your experience of the deceased. If you did not know the deceased, you get the family to tell you some things. And then from that, you launch into your gospel sermon. Now, again, scripture and prayer, read the obituary, personal remarks, eulogy, and then gospel sermon. Now, if you have other stuff, you fit it in there. You can just move your modules around. So if they want a song to be sung, I try and put that, let's do that first or between the prayer and the obit. It'll fit there. If they have more than one, the one goes first and one goes between the prayer and the obit. If they have three, one at the beginning, one between the prayer and the obit, and one after I close in prayer after the sermon. I always close in prayer. So if they have, the family says, okay, we'd like Brother Todd from Forks of Elkhorn Church to assist in the funeral. Could you have him do something? You bet. So I'll have the other preacher do the scripture and prayer at the beginning. And if he wants to say a few remarks, I'll ask him, would you like to say a few things? Yeah. Okay. About how long would you like? And I'm not limiting him, but I am giving him a clock. And so you go, oh, I only need about 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes, then I'll make sure my remarks stay about 20, and so we should keep it about a 30-minute service. And I'll say that and sort of put him on notice. I need you to stick with what you told me. If he goes, well, I need 15 minutes. I say, okay, then that'll probably leave me really about 10 to 15 minutes for what I'm going to do. And I can do that. If I need to negotiate him down a little bit, I'll do that. That rarely happens. Usually guys are very gracious. But typically whoever has the sermon gets the biggest bit of time, and whoever assists will do that scripture and prayer, say a few opening remarks, and they get a shorter amount of time. So if you have more than one, that's the way it is. Every now and then you have a funeral where you're going to have 5, 6 people speak. It's rare, but for certain pastors and all who've died. I've been there, and they have a lot of people speak. It just goes on a long time. That's okay. But in most of your sermons, most of your funerals, you want it to last 30, 35 minutes, and that's all. And why it matters is the funeral home has scheduled the crew out at the graveside, right? So you've got, I know it sounds bad, but grave diggers, they're out there and they're waiting to lower that body in the grave and cover it up. And they schedule that, and the cemetery schedules their burials sequentially. So if you go too long, it messes up everybody's day, and you just need to be thoughtful and sort of stay on schedule. So the funeral, they typically plan for about a 30-minute funeral, and then they head to the graveside. So you've got two parts in the funeral. You've got the funeral service, and then you process to the cemetery and do the graveside service. At the graveside service, I just recommend to guys, you say almost nothing. I just do like an introductory remark and say, as we plant this body in the ground, we don't do this with despair, but we do this like the way a farmer plants a seed, waiting for it to spring forth in new life. The Apostle Paul explains this, and then I'll go into 1 Corinthians 15. Read passage from 1 Corinthians 15. And when I conclude with that, I pray. And after I pray, I go over and I just shake the hands of all the family seated there on the front row. Now, there's something that some places do. Some places the funeral director does it. Some places the pastor does it. Either way to work, this is one of those things you can ask the funeral director. So if they have a spray of flowers on the casket, especially if there are roses, a lot of times, the pastor or the funeral director will say to the women, would you like a rose from the spray to remember your mother or your dad or whoever? And if they say, yeah, then you pull one of those roses out of the spray and give it to them, and give it to all the women. And sometimes the funeral director will do that. It's one of those things when you meet with the funeral director, you can ask him, would it be appropriate for me to do that? Now, there might be some places in the country where they don't do that at all. And he would go, what are you talking about? So I wouldn't do it. But in a place where it's customary, you don't want to not do it, because then it looks like you've not been thoughtful. So find out those are the kind of funeral customs you want to find out do they exist. But the graveside service should be brief. Sometimes they're going to have other things that happen at the graveside, namely military honors, or if they're a Mason or some kind of lodge like that, and man, like in Eastern Kentucky, there was a time everybody was a Mason, and the women were in what was called the Order of the Eastern Star, and they have their little thing. And so if there's anything else at that graveside, it's going to happen after I'm through. Now, I'm all for the military honors, but I really don't like the Mason stuff, but that ship has sailed, right? It's not part of my service, but the family has every right to do it. The guy was a Mason. You guys know what I'm talking about? Have any of you ever seen Masonic rites done at a funeral? Yeah, they put on this apron, and it's a strange thing. Now, military honors, just prepare you. There are two ways that military honors are done. Be grateful if you're near a military installation where they send to the graveside active duty personnel. So active duty personnel are always dressed sharp, and they do everything precisely. But in most places, you're not near a military installation. They they send guys from the local VFW. Now, God bless them. I'm grateful for them. They want to honor their fallen comrade. Uh, but a lot of times, I'm telling you, these guys are old. I mean, they're old. And there's nothing done much precise. What they will do, so the way military honors work, so they have a flag draped over the coffin. And at the graveside, after you finish your thing, you have scripture and prayer, then you stand back, and there'll be someone who'll call orders, and they'll have typically 7 guys, and they'll do a 21 gun salute. So they will shoot in the air 7 rounds 3 times. And these old guys, I'm not making this up, that they tell me they use blanks. I sure hope they use blanks, because they stand right over there across from the grave, and sometimes they're more, instead of like this, they're more like this. And it's like, boy, I hope they're using blanks, and because they don't always get them up as high as you want them to. I've had them at Camp Nelson. Camp Nelson's a national cemetery on the other side of Lexington. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Both of Tanya's parents are buried there. My dad was going to be buried there. In the end, he moved down to Western Kentucky, and when he died, he bought a grave down there. And, you know, it's free for veterans to be buried in a national cemetery. So my dad always said he was going to be buried at Camp Nelson. He loved Camp Nelson, but in the end, he bought a plot down in Western Kentucky and was buried there. But we had active duty military at his funeral, and man, they were beautiful. I loved it because I knew my dad would love it. They were just, boy, it was precise. They fold the flag. The 2 come up on each end of the grave, the casket, and they pick up that flag, and they move in synchronization to the side. And then one of them begins to fold it. They've got gloves. They fold it, and one folds it and moves toward the other. And then when he ends up folding it, he presents it to the other guy. He takes it and does his turn, you know, and then he goes over to the bringing back my dad's funeral. Goes over to the widow, and he kneels, and he presents her the flag on behalf of a grateful nation, the President of the United States. And it's a neat thing. My dad loved being a vet, loved being in the Army. I was grateful for that. Those VFW guys, they are sweet and wonderful. They never do it as sharply as active duty military personnel, but I thank God for them. And they come out, some of them, that's all they do. You can, down at Camp Nelson, they have funerals all day long, you know, veterans that die, and those guys stay down there. My uncle was a POW from World War II. And man, you talk about a turnout. Oh my goodness, there was a string of motorcycles, 100 motorcycles long, of guys wearing their POW MIA vest and flying the flag because the POW had died. It's a sweet thing. I think it's a good thing. But that will always be done after you're through, and you just step to the side and watch it, and then the funeral director will tell everybody they're done. You just don't want the graveside to last long for a lot of reasons. The schedule of the cemetery, and as well as weather can be an issue. I mean, just a lot of things. So keep that brief. At Buck Run, a lot of times, then we typically have meals at the church afterward for our members. So key members of our church die. You know, the community group will prepare a meal, and we invite all the family to come. We'll have, I don't know, for Doug Sanderson's funeral, I guess we had 100, and then for Gene Brown's, did we do that? It wasn't as big, yeah. We end up feeding a lot of people in the course of a year at funerals. But again, it's a great ministry, and just there's a joy. I remember when my dad died, just the joy of having that meal together afterward. We had people from every church my dad had ever pastored in the United States were there, and seeing people that he pastored in Michigan back in the 70s and Owen County and Christian County. I mean, it was just all over it came, and it was just a joy to have a meal with them and to see them, but a lot of people. So the funeral is just an opportunity for you as a pastor to really minister to them, bond with them, your church to love on them. You get a reputation for caring for people. That's going to help you grow and reach people in the future. Everything about it creates that atmosphere of generosity and care.